Please welcome director and producer Ken Burns.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be back in Town Hall. I want to thank Jeffrey Goldberg and everyone at the Atlantic for making us part of their festival and for giving such attention to this founding moment of ours. You know, we have been working on this film for almost a decade. We began when Barack Obama still had 13 months to go in his presidency. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge as we've made the film, and we're very grateful that you're here at our finish line in New York City, where so much of the war took place. On behalf of my co-directors, Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt, who are both here, we're very grateful also to PBS. We have made more than 40 films. We have, over the last 40 plus years, broadcast more than 40 films with public broadcasting, and I can say unequivocally, none of those films could have been made anywhere but PBS. We'd like to thank our underwriters. There are a lot of them. Many important people have contributed to this. The Bank of America, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which has been involved in almost every film, and as you know, has just been threatened existentially with its own existence. The Better Angels Society, many individuals who have contributed to this film, and many of them are in this room. I'd like to acknowledge our film is about an 18th century subject, and we have 61 voices who read scores of different people, most of whom you've never heard of before, to make the story come alive. There's the top-down folks that we hope we give dimension to, but there are many of the people who have recorded with us. They range from Alan Alda to Meryl Streep, and many of the people, the 61 people, are here with us tonight, and from the bottom of my heart, I am so happy that they're here. They helped make the revolution come alive. Obviously to Natalie and Mary Francis, but also our other people involved in the music, Johnny Gandelsman of the Silk Road Ensemble, Dave Cieri, Yo-Yo Ma, Rhiannon Giddens, Jennifer Chrisberg, all made the story, the music, the sound of 18th century world and the United States come alive for us, and we are incredibly grateful. Many of our own production team are here, the editors and the producers and the people who found the paintings, the people who found the maps, who found the drawings, who found the documents, the people who shot the live cinematography over the last 8 years, trying to bring alive the beauty of the American continent, which is the main star of this film. And Sarah and Dave and I are so grateful for your help. Not here is our writer. In the beginning, the Bible correctly notes, is the Word. My friends at the Atlantic understand that better than I do, I think. And for more than 45 years, Jeffrey Ward has been our writer of most of the films that we've made, from the Civil War to baseball to jazz to World War II, the Vietnam War, and now the American Revolution. And he is here in spirit, and we're very grateful. And finally, I just wanted to say thank you to I'm the father of 4 daughters, and my 2 oldest ones, Sarah and Lily, both in the film business, both incredible directors and producers and writers are here tonight. So I was talking to Jeffrey backstage, and the original idea is that we would show 6 clips totaling 47 minutes across most of the episodes of the film, and we just thought, we've been working on it for a decade. Jeffrey has asked the staff of the Atlantic to block the exits, and we're going to show all 12 hours. And, okay, so you'll be out tomorrow at 8 in the morning if we don't take any bathroom breaks. No, we are going to show just 6 clips totaling 47 minutes, and then I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion with Sarah and Annette Gordon-Reed, one of 24 extraordinary scholars and writers whose expertise covered every aspect of this global war and help us understand it. And you'll see Annette in the film, and you'll see her on stage. And we're joined by Tom Hanks, who we have been working with now. We are figuring out it's close to 25 years. He has kindly lent his voice to our films and ennobling so much of the stories that we've told. And of course, moderated by my dear friend, Jeffrey Goldberg. The first clip is the introduction to the series, episode 1, the overture. If it needs an introduction, we're in super big trouble. We're gonna jump to our second episode for the second clip. Each one of the episodes is named after a phrase from Thomas Paine. The first you will see. The second is called An Asylum for Mankind. And we will deal with an important document that's produced at the end of the second episode. We too, the war is in Boston, and then it comes down to New York because they heard good things about New York, Jeffrey. And we are in episode 3 going to show you most of the story of the Battle of Long Island. We are then, and that is in an episode called The Times That Try Men's Souls. And then from our episode 5, which is The Soul of All America, is the intro to that episode. And then another shorter piece about the partial winter that they spent at Valley Forge, starving and dying. It was something like, one of the biggest cities in the colonies, and it's an amazing situation there. And then the sixth episode, which is called The Most Sacred Thing, which to Thomas Paine was the Union. We begin with the idea of union and end with the idea of union. We're actually, if there are people who don't know how it turns out, when that Valley Forge scene is over, you just head for the exits, because we're going to show a little bit of the final main battle of the revolution. We still have 40 minutes to go in our film, but it's what happens, who wins. And so, if you're uncomfortable about having it spoiled for you, since I'm not showing all 12 hours, then please, quietly make your way to the exits. Anyway, I look forward to the conversation afterwards. Thank you so much for coming out. We're so excited to be here.
Please welcome the Executive Vice President of Atlantic Live, Candace Montgomery.
Wow. Yes, another round of applause. Not for me, for the film. What an extraordinary look into the American Revolution. What we have just seen is a powerful reminder that the American Revolution was not only a military struggle, but also a profound human story. This series invites us to see the founding era not as a distant history, but as a living legacy that continues to shape our democracy and our identity today. We are honored to continue this evening with a conversation about the series and its enduring themes. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel, the acclaimed filmmaker Ken Burns, joined by co-director and producer Sarah Botstein, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Annette Gordon-Reed, and one of the voices you've just heard and will continue to hear throughout the sweeping story, Tom Hanks. Coming back to the stage to lead the conversation is the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg. Together, they'll reflect on how the revolution still resonates in our national life and what it means for our democracy in this moment. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, everybody at Atlantic Live who's helped us do this. Thank you to Ken and Sarah, David, their whole teams. I'm going to just jump right in to the deep end here, Ken. These are the times that try men's souls.
Episode 3 and right now.
Episode 3 and right now. When you started this, we were not quite in times that try men's souls, but here we are. What would the founders make of this political moment in America?
Well, you know, they spent a good deal of time in the Constitutional Convention. You know, there's a lot of time after the surrender that you just saw with the wonderful quote by Johann Ewald, read by Christian Friedel, who is an amazing actor. Because we have to find out what happens. The Articles of Confederation don't work, they're toothless, they have to do something else. So, you know, in 1787, in the summer, they start a constitutional convention. They pull George Washington, who's resigned his military commission, out to write a constitution and to try to figure out. And they're spending most of the time basically working on an operating system, and they're reverse engineering against a tyrant. I mean, that's what it is. The balance of powers, the 3 legislative stuff. They're always worried about somebody. Hamilton says, what if someone should ride the hobby horse of popularity and cause chaos? Jefferson, who's stuck in Paris, writes to Madison, who's sort of doing the code. Gouverneur Morris of New York is writing the poetry of the preamble, but Madison's sort of translating all of these compromises, genius compromises and incredibly tragic compromises that are having to be forged to put together the thing. And Jefferson writes, what if someone should lose an election but pretend false votes and reap the whirlwind? So what we have is essentially a struggle against authoritarian. As you heard Jefferson say, and it's in the Declaration, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. We are disposed as human beings from the beginning of time to live under authoritarian rule and be disposed to accept that. And that here, as Johann Ewald points out, after being incredibly contemptuous throughout the rest of the series about these rebels, rebels have been able to defy kings. That's what the whole thing, and I think coming back to this founding story and being able to reinvigorate for everyone, this is made not with any particular audience in mind, we can reinvigorate the original purposes of it and maybe have some possibility of ending the trying times.
Annette, one of the greatest living historians of early American history, let me just put it bluntly to you. Did the American Revolution work, or is it too early to tell?
It's too early. Yeah, it's too soon to tell. Well, we don't know. I mean, one of the things that the founders understood was that republics are fragile. And they were always concerned about the possibility of corruption, about the possibility of everything falling apart. So in tying to what you asked before, I think they would be dismayed, but they wouldn't necessarily be surprised because they understood that republics are fragile and that people have to work at it. You have to work at a democracy and be involved in it. And to the extent that we are not doing that, the result would not be, I think, terribly surprising to them. So we don't really know. America, we call it an experiment. Sometimes experiments succeed and sometimes they fail, and the jury is out.
Sarah, does that surprise you to hear that today? I mean, it seems 10 years ago when you started, probably had a different view that the American story was settled. We were on a course and there was a steady course. You surprised by where we are?
I think I'm personally surprised about where we are. When we interviewed Annette, which was a long time ago actually, she says something very similar to what she just said, which is at the end of the film about the importance that the founders even felt and understood back then, that in order to have a republic that would function this way, you had to be an involved citizen, that you had to care, that you had to use your voice, small, medium, and large. And so I think I'm hoping that the film is instructive and inspiring and will sort of ignite the sense that there's a lot at stake, and the way that we can exercise our individual influence is enormously important now more than ever, actually.
Tom, you're a noteworthy, involved citizen of the United States who's done, in all seriousness, you've done quite a lot to talk about the American story, to extol the American story, to illuminate. What have you learned through your involvement in this film about the revolution and about its staying power, the ideals of the staying power that you didn't know before?
Well, it turns out the revolution will be televised on PBS.
How long have you been waiting to actually use that joke?
I came up in the car on the way to town hall tonight. Because that's my day job. That's all I know. What bangs on me solid is the sense of stasis that an entire continent was. Am I using the word stasis correctly? And that it was meted out by one individual after another. If you're in a red coat and you're a Hessian, you're probably doing it for pay, and at the end of the day, you would like to go home, right? For the Continentals, for the Americans who were there, they were home. And so their participation was 100% voluntary at Lexington and at Yorktown. I don't think there's anything that I have found in the course of human storytelling that is more profound than an individual not giving in to fear and then holding on through the entire endeavor until it is seen to its conclusion. That requires wherewithal, and that requires also a common purpose that says, again and again and again in our own history, we are all in this together. And there is not a better way, I think, to codify that sensibility than the document that was the product of 1776 to 1782, that begins with, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union. Because no one is fallible and no one is perfect. But as you said, are we done with that? No, and we never will be, because we are still daily, individually choosing to work on the forming of a more perfect union. So here it comes.
Ken and Sarah, I want you to talk a little bit about the making of this film. You've taken on hard projects. There's very little that's more difficult, making a film about a war that was captured by portraitists. There's no newsreel, there's no photos, and you have 12 hours and you managed to do it. I have a couple of questions on this front. I remember, and I want Sarah to talk about this, Sarah and I were supposed to get together for lunch one day in New York, and she called at the last minute and said, "I can't make lunch, it's snowing in Saratoga. I've got to get up there and film the snow falling on Saratoga." And, God be with you, get up there and go. But I want both of you to talk about the challenges of bringing the American Revolution to film.
Jeff is never going to forgive me for canceling our lunch. We did.
An improbable excuse that had credibility in its improbability.
Well, just to piggyback on that, I think weather became a character in the film because weather was an important character in the American Revolution. I mean, I think I hadn't really considered or thought about the fact that weather changed the course of history. It changed the course of the war as it moved north to south, cold, warm. How did we fight the elements? There wasn't the Weather Channel. We didn't have Gore-Tex. It was really, it was a really unpleasantly cold and unpleasantly hot war to fight, and very, very brutal. And, I think we've said this a lot, that what started out as being a kind of scary challenge of what are we going to show if we don't have the photographic and newsreel record that we've so enjoyed working with over the last many, many decades, actually was a really interesting artistic and sort of freeing opportunity. And Buddy Squires, who's here tonight, and Megan Ruff, our co-producer, and Ken and David and I spent a lot of time just thinking about how to film the sacred places where the war was fought, how to film the places where the people who were alive then might have lived, to walk on the land that they walked on, to imagine who they were and what their life felt like, where they might have had a meal, where they got dressed, where they got their mail, where they got their information. And so much more like a feature film, only with a crew of 3 or 4. We spent the better part of 5 or 6 years filming across the eastern seaboard. We filmed 165 days in total and have over 200 hours for our amazing editors to sift through. So the live cinematography, as Ken always said, sort of became our photographs, and our paintings became the live cinematography. We kind of turned it upside down.
And we did a lot of reenactments, which I had never been really drawn to. I didn't like the idea. I thought, if you're doing reenactments, why don't you make a feature film? But we sort of did a different approach to it, which is we followed them around for years and years and years in British uniforms, in French uniforms, black regiments, Continentals, militia, Native American, every possible peoples involved in this struggle, and just watch them. We weren't interested in sort of filming the reenactment of the Battle of Monmouth. We were interested in capturing images of what it was like in all of those places, all of the theaters, New England, the Central States, and the South, the 3 movements of this ghastly, bloody symphony that goes on. You know, and at the heart of it, the thing is also remains the same. You know, it's the same process for us. It is the word in the beginning. It's written by Jeff, and as I held off, you know, it's magnificently spoken by Peter Coyote, who here tonight, who has guided us through so many things, and then we are shaping a narrative, and in this case, as I said, you know, we're trying to get the top-down folks and get them with something a little bit more than the kind of, Jane Kamitsky says at one point, they're not marble statues, right? They're really real people, and to get the dimensions of realness, the flaws, the strengths, the weaknesses, whatever they might be, and then introduce you to the scores and scores of other people who didn't have their portrait painted, but doesn't mean they don't exist. And so how you will them to life became a huge dynamic of what we were doing. Maybe it's the signature of Joseph Plum Martin, or the, you know, the oar in the oarlock crossing the East River, as you hear about the father who's so argumentative and contentious that he can't hold on to his congregation. And it makes him real, and you hear his voice, and it's brought to life by all these extraordinary people. You know, Tom, every single quote that Tom read is in the film.
I want to ask you about the casting of voices. I also never asked you this before, but surely at some point in your career you had Peter Coyote do your voicemail, right? Did you ever? Because I would have, obviously, quite obviously.
He hasn't. He's done more than that in our lives. He's been great. The casting is interesting. We rarely have actually cast until recent years. The last couple of decades, there's a sense of that. We've reached out and had people read for us, and sometimes they read a variety of voices. There's a man here I've worked with for 40+ years, Gene Jones. Everyone knows him as an actor who's
amazing.
Amazing. If you know No Country for Old Men and the scene with Javier Bardem in the gas station where the clerk suddenly realizes this moment may be his last. It's fortunately not. Spoiler alert, but for a while, all of us are very worried about the fate of Gene Jones in Behind the Counter. And he can read anything for us, as can Tom, as can everybody who reads. And so what we do is we collect these voices. And sometimes people will read 5 or 6 or 7 voices in the case of Tom, and it'll be spread out all over the film. Or someone will, like a Paul Giamatti, you'll go, you know John Adams, well, let's reprise that. But we got Laura Linney to read, but we didn't make her be Abigail. We had Claire Danes be Abigail. And so a lot of it was just experimental.
But let me ask you about Tom. I mean, sort of you think to yourself, in my uncreative way, you would think, oh, I get Tom Hanks has agreed to come into this. I'll have him be George Washington. Yes. You very definitively did not have him simply be George Washington. I want him to talk about his own roles here, but talk about how you thought about casting voices that are very, very well known.
Tom I mean, I talked about this when Tom came in to read, and we knew how opaque and unknowable Washington was, and it was really important to find a voice that wasn't really front and center in people's minds. And he said himself, yeah, they'll know I'm Tom Hanks. It's Tom Hanks, you know? And so we gave him Albigence Waldo, and you'll never forget, or Ebenezer Denny tonight, or, you know, a minister in Boston after Lexington and Concord. Oh my God, we're in the midst of a civil war. We're killing our own. I mean, all throughout the series. And he could be George Washington and would endow it, but there was something so interesting about Washington's character, and Annette's really good about saying, he's the one person who held the 13 colonies together. Like, without him, we do not have a country. If he was captured in any of those places, if he was killed, the revolution stops. It falls apart. There was one person fit to do it, and he's, you know, deeply flawed. He owns hundreds of human beings like Jefferson. He's rash. He rides out on the battlefield and nearly gets himself killed at Kips Bay and at Princeton, and later at Monmouth. Stops a retreat by his very presence without saying anything. We don't have a country without George Washington. But as you saw, he makes a fatal mistake in the Battle of Long Island, leaves his left flank exposed. He does the same thing with his right flank at Brandywine. But that's who he is, and I wanted somebody. Joe Ellis said, nobody gets inside of him. Maybe Martha, maybe Lafayette, maybe Hamilton. Nobody gets in. And so this is a person that we know, and he gets in to everybody, and we get into him. And so I just said, I'd throw you Washington in 2 seconds, but I'd rather have you be Albigence Waldo and all the other voices.
Tom, any interest at all in ever playing George Washington?
Well,
He's really put a buzzkill on the whole idea of you being Washington now.
Not nearly tall enough. The small details, the poetry that comes out of people that you have never heard of. That comment about the sound of a drum roll at Yorktown just came out of some guy. And some guys, you can look at it as I don't think you could come up with a better anecdote of where I was and what I saw. I can't help get out of my head, quite frankly, Peter Coyote saying this, not in this documentary, but his another one. It would go something like this. The voicemail of Ken Burns is called by so many people that the chances are there is no room for your message. Editing over 280,000 feet of voiceovers shot by a mere 3 people, of muskets, cannon, women doing laundry, flags unfurled, signatures on bits of parchment, oil paintings that go back hundreds and hundreds of years and yet come to life before your very eyes are available for commenting on only if there is time after this tone. So I think you want to go with that, Peter. You can take it. I am this man, as far as I'm concerned, redefined the concept of non-fiction entertainment. We used to watch Mike Wallace on the 20th century or such things, but when I saw the Civil War, I realized we were in the Rubicon had been crossed of what you can do with photographs and talking heads and sterling music and the story of history. So I just said, make me part of your repertory company and I'll come in. What do you got? I'll be there when I can.
So Sarah and Lily, my daughters, are here, and we were at an after Oscar party at Vanity Fair, only there to troll for voices, only there to troll for this guy. This is like in 2000 or 2001, and I couldn't work up the courage, and Sarah and Lily are pushing me. He's a nice guy, he'll do it. And Tom turned away and said, I owe you big time. They'd studied a little bit of structure and from the Earth to the Moon and other stuff we'd done in films, and it was very fun. And so he read first for a film called Horatio's Drive, but then we had given him a voice of this guy named Al McIntosh, who was the editor of a newspaper in Laverne, Minnesota. And Tom read it magnificently, of course, but then he wrote typed in a typewriter to me this letter that I have cherished and keep to my dying day. He said, I'm dreaming about Al McIntosh. Is there more? And so we found more, and he became the voice of our so the conscience, the Greek chorus of the entire series on the history of the Second World War, from this tiny little perch in Laverne, Minnesota. And after a prologue, an introduction, he's the first voice you hear describing what life is like in Laverne, and he's the last voice you hear at the end of the 7th episode when we found color footage from the citizens of Laverne of the men in their uniforms having a snowball fight in Christmas of 45. They're not dying, they're fighting. 60 million people have died, and he is doing it. And I, if I had to appeal to St. Peter's for anything, I'd give him that last.
What do you got? Call me up. I'll show up.
I think audiences always like to hear that. One of the things that is seemingly unusual about what we do is that we don't give the actors the scripts ahead of time. So they come in, not really knowing what they're going to read, and then we don't know who they're going to ultimately be because we might have the same actor, 4 or 5 people read the same voice. And I think we'll just call out a few more people in addition to Gene Jones, who came in, and I remember thinking, is there anything else we can have him to read because he's that good? But Carolyn McCormick, Wendell Pierce, Lucas Hedges, who else is here? Is Lindsay Mendez. There are a whole bunch of you in the audience, and I just want to say thank you for helping bring the film to life.
And it's not Alan Alda to Meryl Streep, it's Adam Arkin to Meryl Streep. We've lost Alan a long time ago.
Tom, your voicemail soliloquy made me think that a great cap for this night would be to have a Paul Revere bake-off with you and John Lithgow. Just I say, well, I'll hold up cards. Let's come back. I want to come back to something that's very, very, and Annette and I were talking about this a few minutes ago, very striking about this documentary. You brought the war back to the war. Annette, you can please start on this, and Ken, Sarah, jump in. But the striking thing, it's not just the scenes from Brooklyn, which are remarkable, but this was a brutal, horrible war with the level of brutality that we associate with the Civil War, maybe World War II. Talk about bringing it back into history in a way. It's not just a battle of ideas between a mad king and a bunch of dyspeptic Virginians. I say dyspeptic as a positive, not as a negative.
Yeah.
But talk about what they've done here in terms of bringing it back into history.
Well, it's important to bring the war into it because the war creates the context for lots of different things. It creates the context for transforming slavery as African American people choose sides, whether to go with the British or be part of the Patriot cause. War is hell, but it's generative, and it shapes people's understanding about what kind of society they wanted to have afterwards. So we do think more about the carnage of the Civil War. That looms large in Americans' minds. And we do think more about the intellectual side of it with Jefferson and what happens afterwards, Philadelphia, because some of the same people are involved in this to go from writing the Declaration. He's not involved in the Constitution, although he's sending books to Madison from France about things that he should read as he's working on the Constitution. Because it's some of the same people, we mix all of those things together, so it becomes much more about ideas and not as much about war, and the Civil War takes over from that. But watching the excerpt here, I thought it's wonderful to bring the war back into it and make people understand all of the things that were at stake. This was not an easy thing. People died, people lost. The Loyalists were, not treated very, very well, in a way. They ended up in the short end of the stick with all of this, but that is an important part of all of it. You should see everything, not just the great ideas of the Declaration.
I don't know why it is. I feel like, and I think it has to do with the absence of photographs, and the big ideas of our creation. We know, as Maya says at the beginning, Maya Jasanoff says at the beginning of the film, we know exactly when we're born, right? And so we've protected it and kind of encrusted the story with the barnacles of sentimentality and nostalgia, as if by revealing that this is in fact a civil war, and our civil war is in fact a sectional war with very few civilian deaths outside of Missouri and bleeding Kansas, this is our civil war. And maybe our civil war is our revolution, because finally the big issue, I mean, the planters are saying you're enslaving us to the king, and the people who are serving them are hearing this, and the ideas, Jane Comiskey says it's very leaky. You know, you hear the liberty talk and you want it. And the second you say that these British rights are broken out into universal rights, everything's over. Slavery's over. It may take 69 years to be done, but it's over. Women are going to vote. That's over. Gay marriage, whatever it is, this is going to happen once that cat is out of the bag. So people didn't talk about slavery or argue about it. There were people who made representations, as Bernard Bailyn, the late historian, says in this film. But it wasn't until the revolution then slavery was, as John Chapman said, on everyone's mind, if not always on his tongue.
One of the useful complications you throw into this is the discussion of Black Americans enslaved and free and the Loyalist cause. If you were, Annette, I want you to address this subject directly. If you were a enslaved or free Black and you were told that the Loyalists would be looking out for you, including granting your freedom. I mean, it really does complicate the story to think that the Loyalists...
So can we just put this in some perspective?
Yeah.
The British Empire depends on slave labor for its profits. They have 26 colonies in North America, the 13 that we know, and the 13 in the Caribbean, which is their big profit center. That's the thing they're trying to protect against all else. One of the deposed royal governors, Dunmore, Lord Dunmore, is floating in a boat in the Chesapeake Bay because he's no longer in charge of his colony. The rebels are. He gets it in his mind. He is an owner. He enslaves people himself. He's not going to free those people. He suggests that the enslaved people of rebels will be granted their freedom.
He's vicariously progressive.
And that
war measure.
And that the enslaved people of Loyalists have to stay where they are and remain enslaved. And African Americans flee to him. It's a disaster. They die of disease. They're malnourished. They live in substandard boats in this flotilla, and it totally enrages a lot of people in the colonies. And you see, as the scholar Christopher Brown says, that one side is unevenly attached to this institution, the British, and one are completely dependent on it, which are the Americans. And it is a fact of the war. 20,000 Black Americans fought in our revolution, 15,000 for the British and 5,000 for the Patriots.
And Annette, the great hero of the war, the indispensable man, George Washington, wanted his slaves back, wanted his enslaved workers back after the war.
He demanded almost instantly after Yorktown that regiments be assigned to gather the many Black Americans that had fled to Cornwallis and were in Wilmington and in Yorktown, and to gather them up. And eventually, in this town, I was just at Fonce's Tavern this morning, there was a committee that was set out to decide which Black person could leave and which person couldn't. And Washington wanted them all back, and Clinton, who would eventually be in charge of the British Army, and certainly in charge of the British forces in here. New York fell in 1776, September 15th, and it didn't go back to the Americans until November 25th, 1783. That's 7 years and 2 months. And 2 years and a month after Yorktown, and they are sitting at the dock and deciding with different lists the role of Negroes, list of Negroes. They're at Fonce's Tavern, 4 Brits and 3 Americans, adjudicating who can go and who can't go, and Judith Jackson arrives at the boat, and she can go to Nova Scotia, but her daughter cannot, back to Virginia. And so there is this scene replayed again and again and again.
No, I mean, it's the tragedy of the paradox, I guess they say, of liberty, to have people talking about being enslaved by the British, but enslaving people themselves. But they're right, once the battle is joined and once everything cracks open with the war, African American people began to think about the differences that could be made because of this. And then Jefferson later on talks about how the war taught Americans, white colonists, that African American people would fight for their freedom. And it was something that was frightening to them. It caused a problem because they didn't think of them as they did before. And so the war opens all these kinds of things up. After every war, the social life changes. And we see it after the Civil War and after World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, all those kinds of things. When people fight for something, they feel that they have rights.
The breaking of these tropes, I think, is the great gift of a Ken Burns documentary. Mm-hmm. We have come to accept essentially some version of a My Weekly Reader or a postage stamp version of, well, this happened, and therefore America was on its way. Anyone who watches this, I'm just hearing so much of this as I'm hearing for the first time as I'm watching, and I think, why was I not told this when I studied American history for the first time in 5th grade? And on and on. What are we afraid of?
Well, Tom, let me stay with you for a minute here, because we're in a moment in American history right now in which PBS is under intense pressure. The Smithsonian Institution is under tremendous pressure. The National Archives has already lost its independence as an independent source of scholarship. There is a strong faction of Americans, powerful faction of Americans, who believe that to highlight the flaws in our history, early flaws and flaws into the modern age, somehow weakens America. You've done a masterful job. I'll just think of two things off the top of my head. Band of Brothers in the Pacific, where the overarching cause is just, the American cause is righteous, but you don't hide complicating truths of what happened. Give us your analysis, and I want to hear it from everybody on this question.
Get out of my way, and I'm going to give my analysis.
And then I'll ask the historian next to you to correct whatever you correct.
He's a movie star. He has the answers.
But no, I mean. Talk about this moment and the threat to full, what you might call full history.
Well, it comes up to me. It's a very basic kind of like thought process of, I think, at some degree, the incurious and the desire to maintain some brand of status quo by establishing the only narrative that is acceptable by way of, well, it's made by the people who are in power, who want to guarantee themselves to be in power. World history is filled with this stuff again and again. We've seen it our own time in our own lifetimes. Here's what I don't understand. Do you not see from this how far we have come? Do you not see this very basic three-way story? That was then. This is now. We know better. And you do not get that unless you understand the conversation we've had about slavery, who can go, who can stay, that it was part and parcel to what was supposed to be, really, if you want that brand of narrative. They lit fireworks on the 4th of July, and the next thing we know, the United States of America is under a flag made by Betsy Ross and all as well.
Not mentioned in our film.
Yeah, okay. So it's the minutia that turns it into, well, again, when I go back to when I started looking at history as really a great story, as opposed to just those kind of date and facts, well, it all comes down to one damn thing after another, and how do we deal with that? And look how often, by often I mean 51% of the time, I mean 49% we were wrong, but 51% of the time, we steered towards the right way of what? Making a more perfect union. And that describes how far we have come. And I gotta say, I'm a proud American. I think we've kicked the ass out of every country elsewhere on the country by getting closer and closer to that target. And it comes out without a doubt when you look at history with enough dispassion to understand we did not know better then, but we do now.
No, I mean, I don't see how anybody, I mean, going to the Smithsonian, for example, the Museum of African American History, any of those things, it's a thrilling story of progress. I mean, from the basement on up, and they tell the story of progress. It's an enlightening story. It's one that makes you feel proud of how far we have come. And that's the thing. It's not about criticizing America. You don't see the sense of progress in your own life if you only thought about the good things that had happened to you.
Annette, where does this brittleness come from?
Pardon me?
Where does this brittleness come from, this idea that there can only be one truth and it means we were always right, everybody else is always wrong?
Well,
you're at the cutting edge of what's happening right now in America.
Yeah, at Harvard. There have always been a group of people who question whether or not people of color are actually part of all of this. And so the focus on the story of progress through the progress of African American people seems illegitimate to them, in a way, that it seems like it's beside the point. And I do think a lot of it is maintaining the status quo, but I think that discomfort about America as an ideal, as opposed to America as blood and soil, is something that makes people a little wary about a story that is capacious, that is inclusive. And I think that's really what it is. And many things are involved in it, but that's been part of American history as well.
Let me end with Ken and Sarah on this same broad question. You've been doing this for a while. The climate has shifted, even the climate related to who broadcasts your films. How are you dealing with this challenge, this brittleness and this desire to censor the complicating parts out, and where do you think we're going?
I'm going to do a very small practical answer to that very big question and then turn it to him. One of the reasons that we work in public television and we love everything that public television has to offer is that along with our films, we create lesson plans and bring the films into American classrooms. And in this film, we've created educational content for grades 3rd grade through 12th grade, and then there's a whole piece of what we're hoping to do with college students. I think knowing about our history makes us a stronger, better people, and film is a powerful teaching tool. And I think from where we sit, being able to expose the thoughts of great historians to think about the American Revolution in new and different ways. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in a place and go home at night and go to school and think everybody thinks the same way and does the same thing. I think that's not dynamic. It's not reflective of what makes this country great and worth defending, actually.
I'm really disturbed that yesterday this photograph of an enslaved man named Gordon, everybody knows this photograph, his back is completely scarred with the lashes of the whip from Louisiana. He's a real human being. It's been taken down from the websites. I think that the impulse to simplify, we always use a sports metaphor, a baseball metaphor. It's not a sport, it's a religion. That we're umpires calling balls and strikes. It's why the loyalists have real presence in our story. It's why they're not wrong. They've made a decision to be what they are. And I think there is this tendency to just make it so weekly reader, as Tom said. We superficialize. It's a highlight film. Babe Ruth is hitting a home run. And nobody wants to go into the fact that he struck out so many times, that he's up every 9 times, that there are other people, utility infielders, who at the most critical moment might be part of the most important drama of a particular game. And so for us, it's about not just calling balls and strikes with regard to impartiality, something that PBS has urged us, but also permitted us to dive deep, unafraid of controversy. And by the way, PBS is not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. So, We're keeping our day jobs. This is really important to us. But I think it's understanding the complexities of it. Nothing is diminished by showing the violence. Those ideas, those big ideas in Philadelphia, are not diminished by telling the complete story. We're not diminished by understanding what Conosatega said. Just remember, never fall out with one another. We're not diminished by the understanding that perhaps this whole idea of union was born in a Native American community. We're not diminished by knowing the story of James Fortin, who was born free in Philadelphia, and hears the Declaration read the first time it's read publicly. He's in that audience when they're reading it there, and he doesn't for a second think it doesn't apply to him. He does apply to him, and he fights for the Union. He's captured. He's given a chance to go back to England as a buddy of the captain's son, and he goes, no. He gets sent to a prison ship in the East River, the Jersey, one of the most notorious places. He nearly dies. He walks barefoot back to Philadelphia. His mama thinks he's dead. Becomes very well-to-do, building, money in the Merchant Marines, and funds William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator. That's as much a part of this story as is Mercy Otis Warren that Meryl brings to life in this film. She is a historian and a satirist and a poet and a philosopher at the time who writes the first history of the American Revolution. And we don't know about her. And the way she writes is so beautiful. She's a friend of Abigail, and people say, well, who's better writer? Is it Thomas Paine? Is it Benjamin Franklin? Is it Thomas Jefferson? It may be Abigail Adams and Mercy Otis Warren, or Phyllis Wheatley, a teenage enslaved poet who is respected on both sides of the Atlantic, who corresponds with George Washington, and is the first published African-American in our history. How are you so threatened by knowing that part of the story? All it does is say there is a utility infielder. There's a utility infielder who this time hit the ball through the middle. We scored the walk-off run and we won the game, right? And Babe Ruth still is great. It doesn't take anything away. And Annette herself says it in our film. Nobody is more important than George Washington. We don't have a country without him. You can hold these two things together and understand the contributions of all of the people. It makes it a much more interesting story if it's bottom up as well as top down.
I just want to note that The Atlantic, we have a special issue on the forthcoming 250th anniversary of the United States, coming out in a couple of weeks, right in advance of the premiere of this film. Annette has written a wonderful piece for it. Ken and Sarah have written a wonderful piece for it. Tom is on the hook for a piece next year.
I'm going to be way too busy writing the pledge drive copy for the PBS pledge drives. It's going to be.
But look for that.
Going to be a lot of
that issue, November 16th. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you all for coming tonight. We'll see you tomorrow at the Atlantic Festival. Thank you.